Obsidian 1.9 just dropped for insiders, and it finally brings something that many of us have been waiting for: native database support. Let me show you what it looks like, what it can and cannot do just yet. This is a first look at the new Bases core plugin in Obsidian 1.9. It's less detailed than my usual plugin tutorials, partly because I wanted to get it to you quickly, and partly because I believe a deep dive will be more useful once the plugin matures. After all, this is still a beta version for insiders only. If you want access right away, you can get a lifetime Catalyst license for a one-time fee of $25. The link is in the description. I will also compare the Bases plugin with the DB folder community plugin that many of us have been using to get database functionality until now. After all that, I will shortly go over some of the other features and changes in this release. Come on, let's do it. First things first, let's get the plugin up and running and understand a bit of background. If we are not on version 1.9 yet, we need to update. We go to Settings and General. Click on Check for updates and, once found, install the update. This will require a relaunch of Obsidian. Obviously, I did this already. Then we go to Settings and Core Plugins to make sure the Bases plugin is active. We can see that there are no options available, so we close the Settings dialog. We now have three ways to create a new base. We can right-click on a folder in our navigation and select New Base. I'm doing this in a folder I prepared for this demo called Bases inside my lab folder. The location does not really matter, as we can easily move the file around later anyway. This creates a new untitled node. As we can see, it's not a markdown file, but one with the extension base, a new format introduced by the Obsidian team for this purpose. If we open this node in a text editor, in my case Visual Studio Code, we can see that it is still a plain text file and we can edit the base code here. Not that I would like to do that, it's much easier to configure our base directly in Obsidian. The second option is to use the command palette, by default via Ctrl P, search for bases, and select Create New Base. The result is the same. The third option is also via the command palette, but this time we select Insert New Base. Instead of creating a new file, this embeds the base directly into the currently open node. As we can see, the table initially shows us all the nodes in our vault. That's not what we want. We will see how to configure our bases next. A new base shows all the files in our vault by default. Fortunately, it is very simple and fast to change that. We can filter the results and define the columns to be shown. Let's take the previously created file. First, we rename it to Recipes Base. I have some recipes in my vault, which should serve as a good showcase. We click on Filters, select the Path variable, set it to Contains, and add the path to our recipe nodes. In my case, that's 03 resources/recipes. That does give us the contents of the folder, but it also includes images, which we actually don't need. So we go back to Filters. We can see that we can define filters for all views or just the current view. We will tackle views a little bit later. For now, we just work on all views. I know that all my recipe nodes have a tag called recipe, so we click on Add Filter, select the tags property, set it to Contains, and enter the tag name recipe. And this gives us a list of recipes only. So far, our table shows only the recipe name, but if we open a recipe side by side, we can see that it includes several properties. With the Bases plugin, we can add each of these properties as a column to our table. We just click on Properties, search for the property name, and edit. Once we have all the columns we want, we can order them via drag and drop. We can also edit the properties right here. We can change the rating or flag a recipe for cooking next. The original node immediately reflects all changes. I want to mention two things here that are still missing. At the moment, this only works with properties defined in the front meta. Inline fields are not supported yet. I use inline fields in my recipes for nutritional values, like calories. If we try to add that as a column, the plugin cannot find it. And the second thing is that embedded images do not get displayed. as we can see in the thumbnail column. In fairness, with the DB folder plugin, this does work as long as you're not using the WebP format. So PNG files, for example, would work and would be displayed as thumbnails, but WebP is not being supported. Coming back to the Basis plugin, I'm sure these things will come eventually, but for now, we should be aware of it. We saw already that we can define filters for all views and for individual ones. Let's take a quick look at what we can do with views in the Basis plugin. We are back in our recipes base. In the top left corner, we find a drop-down menu. By default, it just says table. And if we click on it, we get the option to add a view or click on the arrow next to the current view. We do that and then click on Configure View to rename it to All Recipes. Here we could also change the view layout, but currently Table is the only option. Now we open the same dropdown, click on the arrow next to All Recipes, click on Duplicate View, and give it the name Cooked. Nothing much has changed, except that the dropdown now shows that Cooked is the current view. If we now click on Filters and make sure that we work in the This View section, we can add a filter for the property cooked and set it to true. Now we see only recipes that we cooked already and can easily switch views via the dropdown. Let's do one more. We duplicate this view, call it Cook Next, click on Filter and change the filter for this view to the property Cook Next being true. This is empty, so if we now go to All Recipes and check the box for a recipe, we can then go back to Cook Next and then it shows up right away. This is very convenient and really fast. As with properties and columns, there is also room for improvement for views. Right now, the plugin only supports a table view or table layout, but I doubt it will stay that way for long. Adding more view types, such as lists and cards, is already on the roadmap, and knowing the Obsidian team, these will come really soon. So far, we have been working with bases that also were files. But as we have seen earlier, there are also embedded bases. Let's check those out. The easiest way to embed a base is to use the same syntax as for embedding images or nodes. Here's an example where I created a base node, that's a separate file, and embedded it in this node. Alternatively, we can embed base code blocks. Remember when I showed you the base file in my text editor? Here it is again for the recipes base we just created. We can now copy the entire code, go back to our Obsidian node, open a code block with 3 backticks, define it as base code, and paste everything into it. If we then switch to reading view, we can see the same results, including all the columns and views. I promised to compare the new Basis plugin to the DB folder plugin, so here we go. Note that we won't look at every detail. Instead, we will focus on the major differences. Here we have both results. These views are based on the same source, my recipe nodes. On the left, we see the base we created earlier, and on the right, there is the same table created with the DB folder plugin. Let's first look at how we tell each plugin which data to use. We saw this earlier for the Basis plugin. We just click on Filter and then simply select variables and define rules via the user interface. To achieve the same result with the DB folder plugin, we actually need to know how to write the corresponding query. That's not rocket surgery, but it's certainly more cumbersome than just clicking some fields. I also noticed that the DB folder plugin sometimes struggles with selecting and updating values in list properties. Let's look at the difficulty property for this recipe. Currently, it says medium. If I change the value in the base file, it updates correctly in the recipe, but not in the DB folder table. And if I do the same in the DB folder table, the recipe and the base file reflect the change right away. The last thing I want to compare is performance. For this, we won't use the recipes, there are just not enough of them to make a visible difference. Instead, I prepared a base file and a DB folder file for querying my book nodes. This is also not a huge data set with 200 something files, but it's enough for our purposes. I will first open the DB folder file. And now we open the base file. Even without measuring it, we can see that the DB folder file opens much slower and then only shows the first 10 entries while the base file shows the full table. On top of this, the visualization in the base file is simply more compact and easier to read and work with, in my opinion at least. Native database support is certainly the highlight of this release, but there are many other changes and improvements, some of which I want to highlight here. I'm currently looking only at the desktop version. First, there is another new core plugin called Footnotes View. This lets us view and manage the footnotes of the currently active node in a sidebar tab instead of having to scroll around in the node itself. So if you're using footnotes a lot, that one's for you. The legacy properties tag, alias, and CSS class are no longer supported. The Obsidian team prepared for this by adding the alternatives tags, aliases, and CSS classes quite some time ago. So if you have been postponing your front meta updates, now is the time to do them. As always, there are many improvements and fixes. Check them out in the changelog. I left the link to it in the description for you. The new base core plugin is already very good and will only get better. It will certainly replace the DB folder plugin for me. For more details about the plugin and especially the base syntax, I recommend the official documentation, the link to which you can also find in the description. I hope this quick overview of Obsidian's new database support was helpful for you. If it was, feel free to drop a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. If you're interested in Obsidian tutorials, why not watch this one next? It might be useful. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.